What is going on, people? Joey Talks Boxing. I want to give a shout out to Damian Flores for requesting this video idea. The top 10 best heavyweights of all time, or I would say the top 10 greatest heavyweights of all time. I think that when you measure greatness, you got to kind of look at a bunch of factors. You're not just looking at head-to-head who would win these fights. I think that that's only a small part of it. Let me brush my hair. But when it comes down to it, it really comes down to, I look at it era for era, because obviously in the modern era, the heavyweights are a lot bigger, stronger, better nutrition, and they have more modern technology and training. So I don't think it's fair to say, oh, well, a guy from the 40s, he would have lost to someone else from the 2000s, so that doesn't make him greater. I'm kind of more factoring in, era for era, that kind of thing. When I look at greatest heavyweights of all time, I look at a combination of things, mainly your resume. Then I look at your, accomplishments as well, undisputed champion, long reign, that kind of thing. So resume, accomplishments, longevity, and I'm looking at your talent, what you were able to do in your era, how your talent was in your era, what flaws you had or whatnot, or what things you brought to the table in a positive way. And also I'm looking at head-to-head, but the head-to-head is very minor. That's not the main thing of this. So big shout out to Damian Flores. I'm going to get into it, my top 10 heavyweights of all time. I'm going to go from 10 to 1 to make it, like a countdown. So first, I'll just talk about a few guys that didn't make the cut. Jack Johnson, Jack Dempsey, and Sonny Liston. The Jack Johnson and Jack Dempsey. Dempsey was great, but he drew the color line. He didn't fight the other top African-American fighters of the era. He had a relatively short run. I know that Dempsey is very legendary in his, his personality and his ability to draw a lot of people to the stadiums. And he was such an exciting fighter, but I can't put him in the top 10 because I just don't think he did enough. Jack Johnson, the same thing. I know he was the first African-American heavyweight champion. That was a big deal, but he didn't fight a lot of the other top African-American guys, so I have to look at that. I remember seeing a video in Rummy's Corner where Emmanuel Stewart spoke about that. And by the way, if anyone wants to see a video about all the heavyweights being broken down, Emmanuel Stewart on Rummy's Corner, great video, great watch. So he also falls a little short. Sonny Liston had a really good run, but it was mostly against smaller, not as good opponents. And I think in the big fights versus Ali, he kind of wavered in a way mentally that you can't do that, as far as anyone in my top 10, I think, would have all performed better in those situations. So let's get right into it, baby. Number 10, Rocky Marciano. And I'm going to speak a little bit about each guy, and then I'm going to give a little bit of a positive and negative. So Rocky Marciano, number 10, he was undefeated. So I know a lot of people, they're going to look at this and say, well, why is he only 10? He was undefeated. Marciano was great power, and probably at that time the biggest one-punch knockout artist up until that point. Unbelievable stamina. Could be dropped, but had great recovery ability. Could be cut easily, but never enough to stop the fight. Didn't have great balance, had the shortest reach of any heavyweight ever, and still won the title, beating Jersey Joe Walcott after he got dropped in the fight. Comes back and wins the fight. Beat Joe Louis, an old Joe Louis, but still a nice win. Ezra Charles twice, those were good wins. And retired on top, beating Archie Moore. So definitely a great career. I think where he kind of suffers from me is the fact that he doesn't have so much longevity. He kind of had a slow start, got late into boxing. And I know people put a lot of stock into the undefeated thing, but I really don't. It just means you retired before you really had a chance to lose. He had 7 championship wins, which is less than everyone else who's ahead of him on this list. So I know a lot of people put him in the top 5. For me, I have him number 10. That's where I got him. Number 9, Joe Fraizer. Joe Fraizer, similar to Marciano, had a short run, but I look at Joe Fraizer as having the superior skill set with his unbelievable left hook, his great inside fighting, his ability to cut the ring off. Also had a tremendous heart like Rocky Marciano. Maybe Marciano was a little more durable and could recover better. As you saw when Fraizer fought George Foreman, he kind of, was a wrap once he got really dropped. But honestly, I think Marciano would have gotten played with by George Foreman too. But Joe Fraizer obviously has the greatest win in the history of heavyweight boxing, beating Muhammad Ali. So that puts him in a unique, level. But Also, good wins over Jerry Quarry, Oscar Bonaliva, Jimmy Ellis as well. So he had a lot of good wins other than the Ali fight. His problem, though, is not so many wins at the top level. And also, after the Ali win, he doesn't really have any other wins after that really add to his career value. He lost to Ali twice, got hammered by George Foreman both times. So, yeah, he had a great career, but I don't think he had the longevity or did enough to warrant a higher spot than number 9. But, you know, I think some of the guys I have ahead of him, some people argue that Joe Fraser's ahead of, but I got him number 9. Number 8, I got Iron Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson, the youngest champion ever. A lot of people say he wasn't really the champion until he beat Michael Spinks because he was a lineal, but regardless, youngest belt holder ever, undisputed champion, dominating the boxing scene at age from champion of the world from, I think he was 20 years old to, you know, those years, 86, 87, 88, 89, just pure domination. And I made a different video where I said Mike Tyson is the most overrated heavyweight of all time, which he is, but he's still one of the top 10 greatest heavyweights of all time. I mean, I think sometimes hardcore boxing fans, they go the other way and say, oh, he wasn't really that good. Guy beat Michael Spinks, who, you know, beat Larry Holmes and still had probably something left easily. Larry Holmes coming off retirement, but knocked him out easily. So maybe not the greatest top wins, but good wins over Razor Ruddock, Tyrell Biggs, Tony Tubbs, Trevor Burbick, James Bone Crusher Smith, beat Frank Bruno, you know, and trying to remember, you know, a lot of those guys like Pinklin Thomas. He had a lot of wins where he basically cleaned the whole division out. And I think everybody he beat in the top 10 in the 1986 top 10, with the exception of Tim Witherspoon, who had lost to James Bone Crusher Smith, who Mike Tyson beat the next fight. Also beat Tony Tucker. Obviously, the down part is his loss to Buster Douglas. And then he had some personal problems where he kind of got, you know, caught up in the wrong stuff, whatever. We don't have to get into that, but went to prison. Got out, did win the title again, but he beat Frank Bruno, a guy he already beat. It was kind of tailor-made for him. And then lost the big fights versus Holyfield, and then years later versus Lennox Lewis. So that's where I think his career standing suffers from, not beating another great fighter ever, and he didn't have some of the longevity that some of the guys in front of him had. But, man, still all-time great fighter, no doubt about it. Got to put Iron Mike number 8. Number 7, I got George Foreman. George Foreman, unbelievable power, obviously. Unbelievable, you know, ring cutting off, which I think doesn't get the credit for. Didn't have great speed, but a good chin, hard jab, hard left hook, massive right hand, threw the short uppercuts on those smaller fighters. Dominated Joe Frazier for the title in a way that I don't think any heavyweight has ever dominated an undefeated heavyweight champion, probably ever, and took the title. Then, obviously, most notably, he lost to Muhammad Ali, which was, you know, a tough one because he was a favorite in that fight in Africa. I got the photo back there. And one of the most legendary fights ever. Goes on to beat Lyle in a crazy fight, lost to Jimmy Young, then retires from boxing. So if his career had ended at this point, I don't think Foreman would have been in the top 10. Or if he would have been like towards the end of the top 10, maybe where Rocky Marciano was. But comes back, makes a second career in boxing, is hawking grills, changes his persona, beats Burt Cooper, beats Jerry Cooney coming off retirement, goes the distance with Holyfield, goes the distance with Tommy Morrison, but comes back and beats Michael Moore, the undefeated lineal heavyweight champion, by knockout in round 10 to become the oldest heavyweight champion of all time. One of the most amazing achievements ever. That puts him in a new stratosphere. Foreman, you know, he had unbelievable top wins. Where he doesn't really rank as high for me as some of the other guys is lack of depth in his wins. I know he has the longevity of being one of the youngest champions and being the oldest champion, but not a lot of depth. You really look at it, it's Joe Frazier twice, and even the second one, Joe Frazier was kind of shot. Ron Lyle, he beat the guy before Ali. I forgot his name. Let me check him up. But, you know, then he comes, you know, back and beats Burt Cooper, Michael Moore. Even if you want to give him the Shannon Briggs win, which I thought he really won, not really a lot of depth in his resume. He probably has like 10 fights, and he's like 6-4 in the 10 fights that people really care about. So yeah, not a whole lot of depth there. But with that being said, still warrants being the number 7 heavyweight of all time because of his top end wins versus Joe Frazier and Michael Moore. And even losing to Ali is defendable. And Jimmy Young too is a pretty good fighter. But yeah, I do think Foreman has gotten a little bit overrated, but still a unbelievable career that he had. Trying to figure out the guy who he beat. His name was Boone Kirkman. He was also ranked in the top 10 at the time. And he beat George Chuvalo too before that, who's kind of like a gatekeeper, Derek Chisora type. Great movie on Netflix, I think it is. Big George Foreman. Highly recommend to everyone. Number 6, Wladimir Klitschko. A lot of people are going to say, oh, how could you put Klitschko in there? He's in such a weak era. Never beat another great heavyweight, which is all true. But third longest run in the history of heavyweight boxing. 18 championship wins. Unbelievable jab. Unbelievable right hand. Tremendous left hook. Good footwork for a big guy. Did struggle with his chin at times. Did have a rough beginning of his career, getting knocked out by Ross Purity and Corey Sanders and Lehman Brewster. But he came back under the tutelage of Emmanuel Stewart and had an unbelievable run. Beat a lot of really good contenders, which I don't care what people say. To have a run like that is difficult, as consistently as he did. You see how hard it is. Joshua lost a couple times to guys that people didn't think he was supposed to lose to, even though Usyk has shown he's amazing. Fury even struggled with Ngannou recently. So I got Klitschko beating guys like David Haye, Chris Bird, Monty Barrett, Sam Peter, Ruslan Chagayev, Sultan Ibragimov. He just has a lot of good wins in there. Alexander Povetkin. And even in his later career, he lost to Fury, but never got a chance to do the rematch, and that was old Klitschko. And at 41 years old, he almost beat an undefeated Anthony Joshua in one of the greatest heavyweight fights of all time. So, yeah, I think Wladimir Klitschko definitely deserves his spot on this list as a all-time great. I got number 6. Number 5, I'm going to go with Evander Holyfield. Now, Holyfield got some of the greatest wins in the history of heavyweight boxing, knocking out Mike Tyson the first time, and the second time making Mike quit. Riddick-Bowe rematch where he avenged his loss. Michael Moore rematch where he avenged his loss. Beat guys like Pinklin Thomas, Addison Rodriguez. Knocked out Buster Douglas for the title, who had just beaten Mike Tyson. I know that Buster Douglas was in the greatest physical condition after that, but still, he did it. You got to give it to him. Beat old Larry Holmes and old George Foreman, but still good wins at the time. They more, George Foreman beat Moore after that, and Larry Holmes beat Ray Mercer before that. Beat Ray Mercer. He just has such a consistent number of wins. And even later in his career, he beat guys like John Ruiz and Hasim Rahman. Lost badly to Lennox Lewis in the first fight, but he came back, almost won the second fight. Now, he does have some PED allegations that I think are probably legitimate, but that does kind of play into it. And I was debating putting him 6 or Wladimir Klitschko 5. But right now, I got him 5th. I think his depth in his not depth, but his high-level wins are better, and he doesn't have such bad losses like Wladimir Klitschko. So it is close. I would favor Wladimir Klitschko in a head-to-head fight, and I think I did that video once. But I got Holyfield number 5. Number 4, I'm going with a guy who fought Evander Holyfield, Lennox Lewis. Head-to-head, I think Lennox is the best that's ever done it from a size, power, speed, good ring IQ, could box, could slug, could brawl if he had to, tough guy. Tremendous power in the right hand, hard jab, got the uppercut, which most big guys don't have. Good defensively, smothered well, knew how to be dirty if he had to be. Early in his career, he relied more on speed, but then after getting stopped unexpectedly by Oliver McCall, he kind of changed his style with the help of Emmanuel Stewart, who him and Eddie Futch are probably the 2 greatest heavyweight trainers of all time. Because Futch, he trained, guys on this list as well. But he trained Joe Fraizer as well on this list. But I look at Lennox as unbelievable. Went on a great run, beating guys like David Tua, Evander Holyfield, Mike Tyson, Vitaly Klitschko at the end, Shannon Briggs, Frank Bruno he beat, Razor Ruddock. I mean, he has a lot of, just good names. Michael Grant, who had hype at the time. Got knocked out unexpectedly by Hasim Rahman, but came back and won that fight. I think Lennox is unbelievable. Where he struggles for me is the fact that he got knocked out twice by lower tier opposition, and his run wasn't that long. in comparison to these top 3 guys that I have ahead of him. And he took him a while to really get to top level. But he's got a lot of good wins. Even Gary Mason was a good win at the time. I mean, his resume is definitely very strong. Tommy Morrison was another guy that he fought. Also, I think the Ray Mercer fight was debatable. I kind of thought he lost that, but it could have gone either way. But Lennox Lewis, definitely one of the greatest heavyweights of all time. I got him number 4. And Lennox Lewis and Rocky Marciano are the only heavyweights that have retired with the number 1 spot. So, yeah, definitely think Lennox deserves to be on this list. Number 3, I got Joe Louis. Joe Louis, a lot of people have 1. Most people would have him either 1 or 2, but I got him number 3. Longest run in the history of heavyweight boxing. Big salute to him. Unbelievable power. Great balance for his time. Boxing was a little bit different then, though. He only fought against 8 African-American fighters because of the color line. He was really the heavyweight, the African-American heavyweight who was allowed to be brought back in because, the money was right behind him. And there had not been an African-American heavyweight champion since Jack Johnson. He comes in there and he wins the title versus James Braddock, Mr. Cinderella Man, and I think he had to pay 10% of his purses. I saw Teddy Atlas say that on Joe Rogan show. He had to pay 10% of that purse and all his future earnings to James Braddock just to get a shot at the title. So that shows you how unjust the system was back then. But Joe Louis dominates him, avenged his loss versus Max Schmeling, who knocked him out in 2 rounds, and went on a run of guys who he had beat that were, really good fighters as well. Where I think he loses stand for me is getting knocked out by Schmeling early in his career, not having the greatest chin. He got dropped a lot. So he seemed to have problems with big punchers and all that. And also, from what I heard from Emmanuel Stewart, and from what I've seen, the guy didn't do well with movers. He struggled with movers. Billy Conn, a light heavyweight, was outboxing him for many of the rounds and was winning, and then got caught and late in the fight. I know a lot of people thought that Joe Walcott really beat him the first time. Kind of a robbery. There's not a lot of footage of that fight. And then he won the second one. And then Ezra Charles eventually, I believe, ended his reign. Still the longest reign in the history of boxing. Came back out of retirement and won a few fights and then fought Rocky Marciano. But that was an old Marciano. And I think that's also a problem, is that the best opponents that he fought were at the end of his career. Guys like Joe Walcott, Rocky Marciano, Ezra Charles. Kind of similar to Wladimir Klitschko, where the best opponents that Vlad had fought were guys like Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury. Those are probably the 2 best opponents he fought. And they were at the end of his career. So, yeah, definitely think that Joe Louis is great, but I don't rate him quite as highly as others, but still number 3 nonetheless. Number 2, I got the Eastern Assassin, Larry Holmes from Eastern Pennsylvania. This is the real truth. I had for a long time had Larry Holmes as number 1. It's the number 1 greatest heavyweight of all time. I go back and forth with my number 1 and number 2, but right now I'm going to have Larry Holmes at number 2. Unbelievable jab, unbelievable defense, great lateral movement, ability to recover top notch, as you saw versus Ernie Shavers and Mike Weaver and even Mike Tyson, where he got up 3 times off the deck. And beat Ken Norton for the title. Unbelievable last round, unbelievable fight. I thought he has had it anyways, even without the last round, even if you thought he lost the last round. Ernie Shavers, he outboxed unbelievably in the first fight. Second fight, gets caught and gets back up, and proceeds to win the fight. Beat Mike Weaver, guy who was the title holder after that. Tim Witherspoon in a really good fight. Beat Ashad Ali, whatever, who cares about that. Beat a lot of guys. James Smith, Trevor Berbick, Leon Spinks. The biggest signature fight of his career was the Jerry Cooney fight. I know a lot of people look at Cooney now as a joke, but at the time, Cooney was a problem, and he would have beaten probably every other heavyweight on that night, or close to it. Unbelievable win for him. And then he fights later in his career, and this is where I think maybe he loses a little bit of steam to the number 1 guy I have. Some of the guys he didn't fight in that era, guys like Pinklin Thomas, Greg Page, there were a few guys that he didn't fight. Maybe there was money, maybe they just had lost beforehand, but I think he was kind of more selective at the end of his career, which is normal. That's what people do usually. Fought Michael Spinks after beating Marvis Frazier, Joe Frazier's nephew, or was it son, and lost the first fight to Michael Spinks. It was very close. I do think Spinks won the first fight legitimately, but usually they give the benefit of the doubt to the champion. But the second fight, I thought Larry Holmes won hands down, and the fact that they gave that to him to to what's his name, to Michael Spinks was a disgrace in my opinion. And then Larry comes back out of retirement. Obviously the Mike Tyson win, loss, I should say, Mike Tyson beating him, but showed great recovery. But then after that, he makes a comeback back in 1991 because I think he wanted to be a heavyweight great, like George Foreman. He wanted to try to win the title again. They were both pursuing it at the same time. And he beats Ray Mercer, who at the time was undefeated in a top 5 heavyweight. He schooled him at 42 years old. So he showed great ability. And even after that, he did well versus, he arguable loss, but still beat Jesse Ferguson. And he almost beat Oliver McCall for the heavyweight title McCall beat Lewis right before that by knockout, beat Lennox Lewis. Almost won that fight. And that was at 45 years old or 46 years old? I think 45. So unbelievable career, showed great longevity. He had the fundamentals, and that's why Floyd Mayweather likes him so much. And that's why Floyd Mayweather rated him as the highest heavyweight ever, because Floyd respects the fundamentals. So I got Larry number 2. Someone wants him to put him number 1 or number 3 or number 4, whatever. It's all understandable and arguable. But those are the top, definitely in the top 5. And for me, the top 4 I've always been consistent on in terms of my Mount Rushmore. And now, last but not least, my number 1 heavyweight of all time, greatest heavyweight ever, number 1, Muhammad Ali. No secret, obviously. A lot of people think he's the greatest heavyweight of all time. Unbelievable speed, unbelievable movement. Never has there been a guy that size with that kind of movement in the history of boxing, probably in the history of humanity. Tremendous speed, tremendous, footwork, hand speed, stamina in his younger days. Solid power, not a one-punch knockout artist, but more of an accumulation puncher. Fast jab, throw flurries, which most of these big guys can't do. Chin was unbelievable as well, which people didn't think he had that early in his career because he never got tested. Very rarely got tested. Recovery ability was good, as you saw versus Henry Cooper. And he just dominated that era, that first era of boxing, beating Sonny Liston twice. No competition in either of those fights. And that was versus the biggest, baddest man at the time, Sonny Liston, who was still a killer, even at that point. I know people say, he was a little bit older, which is true, but still an absolute killer. Beat guys like Cleveland Williams, Cooper, Doug Jones. And then he has the exile after the Ernie Terrell fight. And obviously he didn't want to go to the war in Vietnam. That was a big controversy. Gives up 3 years of his prime, comes back, fights Jimmy Ellis, wins, fights against Bonanueva and Quarry and wins. And then he loses a great fight to Joe Fraizer, but Joe Fraizer is on this list, so nothing wrong with that. But he eventually lost to Fraizer. Lost to Ken Norton because he didn't show up on time, properly for the fight. Lost to Ken Norton, but then he beats Norton in the rematch. Honestly, I thought that rematch was a draw, but it was very close. Then he does the unthinkable and beats George Foreman, who at the time was just knocking out Ken Norton and Joe Fraizer, 2 of the guys who beat Ali. And he beats him in Zaire, Africa. Got the picture in the back. Unbelievable victory. And you got to give it to him. That was legendary. And then goes on a second run, beating guys like Ron Lyle, Joe Fraizer again, Jimmy Young, arguably a robbery, Ken Norton, completely a robbery in the third fight. But Ernie Shavers he beat, and he beat guys like, Chuck Wepner, the real Rocky. So he had an unbelievable career. Then at the end, he fought too many times. Did overlook Leon Spinks in the first fight and lost. That's an unacceptable loss in my opinion. And then he did come back and beat Leon Spinks in the rematch. Lost twice at the end of his career to Larry Holmes and Trevor Berbick, but he was very shot at that point, so I don't really use that to discredit him so much. But the one negative I will say about Ali is he did take some fights not seriously. He didn't take certain fights seriously. Fights like Leon Spinks, can't lose that one. The first Norton fight came in way out of shape, and also the Jimmy Young fight, he came in out of shape. But still, when you look at his career, his skill set, his athleticism, his resume, he fought everybody in his era, won and came out on top. And not necessarily, undefeated, because he wasn't. You don't have to be undefeated, but you got to come out on top, and that's what he did. The Larry Holmes, he took every fight more seriously, so I give him that. But I give Ali the edge for his peak performance and his athleticism and physical attributes and his big fight winnings and also him fighting everyone. So I got Ali 1. So that's my list. I'll run it back down from 1 to 10. 1, Muhammad Ali. 2, Larry Holmes. 3, Joe Louis. 4, Lennox Lewis. 5, Evander Holyfield. 6 would be Wladimir Klitschko. 7, George Foreman. 8, Mike Tyson. 9, Joe Fraizer. 10, Rocky Marciano. I will say this is recorded before the May 18th fight between Tyson Fury and Oleksandr Usyk. Who wins that fight could change a lot. If Fury wins, he might get to he's top 10 for sure with his resume. If Usyk wins, it's borderline top 10. So maybe we'll do a what's it called? An addendum. We'll make a correction, when that comes. We'll do an updated list at that time. But as of right now, this is my top 10 heavyweights of all time. Please let me know if you like this video. Please like, share, comment, subscribe. Peace.